Come round by my side, and I'll sing you a song. I'll sing it so softly it'll do no one wrong. On Birmingham Sunday the blood ran like wine, and the choir kept singing of freedom.
18 days after the March on Washington, Birmingham, Alabama, a bomb exploded in the 16th Street Baptist Church just before a Sunday morning service. 15 people were injured. 4 children were killed.
Welcome to 1960s Birmingham, a time and place notoriously defined for its racism, segregation, and violence. Founded in 1871, the city quickly became an industrial hub for Alabama. But unfortunately, as the city flourished, so too did its racial tensions, eventually leading itself to become the most segregated city in America. With its deeply rooted segregationist values, the city became a harbor in which vigilante groups such as the Ku Klux Klan could thrive. Subsequently, public officials such as Alabama Governor George Wallace and Public Safety Commissioner Bull Connor facilitated their rise to power by openly flaunting their racist ideals.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
Under the tyranny of these two racially charged officials, the early years of the 1960s endured numerous acts of racially motivated violence, specifically through the use of bombs. By the spring of 1963, Birmingham was in desperate need of a leader to forefront growing racial tension. Thus, Martin Luther King Jr. found his way down to the city that had since been dubbed Birmingham. 16th Street Baptist Church would serve as the headquarters for his future projects. Through his endeavors, he organized many successful protests that shed light on the friction that plagued the city. His efforts would ultimately prove to accumulate into his subsequent arrest on April 12, 1963. While in jail, King would encourage his followers to continue the fight for racial equality by composing a letter that explicitly outlined the duties they had to fight for justice. This letter, later published as the Letter from Birmingham Jail, would continue to fuel a desire for civil rights. The letter inspired the members of the 16th Street Baptist Church to continue what King had before started, and would lead the congregation to open their church to serve as the heart for the nonviolent campaign for equal rights. This gesture, though honorable, condemned the church to many acts of racially charged violence. 9:15 a.m. Carol Robertson arrives at the 16th Street Baptist Church for Sunday school. 9:30 a.m. Carol is joined by Cynthia Wesley and Denise McNair. 10 a.m. Addie Mae and her younger sister Sarah Collins are the last to arrive at the church. Around this time, a white man is seen exiting a white and turquoise Chevrolet car. He is also seen placing a box under the steps of the northeast corner of the 16th Street Baptist Church. 10:10 a.m. By random chance, these 5 girls found themselves in the basement bathroom together, inches away from the mysterious package. At 10:22 a.m., a makeshift bomb concealed in the planted white box exploded. Addie Mae Collins, Carol Robertson, Cynthia Wesley, and Denise McNair were instantaneously killed. Sarah Collins suffered 23 individual shards of glass blasted into her eyes. She would forever be blind in her right eye, and 22 additional individuals were seriously injured. The inside of the church was littered with glass and debris. The walls were crumbled, and an entire staircase was blown loose. The explosion was so strong that it blew a motorist right out of his car, and automobiles parked beside the church were blown 4 feet away. The immediate response from the church and its surrounding community was heart-wrenching. In the hours to follow, the streets of Birmingham were flooded by protesters who demanded justice. This crowd was met by police brutality that ensued for 2 hours, with officers firing rifles into the air to control the hysterical crowd. The chaos that transpired resulted in the untimely death of 16-year-old Johnny Robinson, who was shot down by police. Similarly, Virgil Ware, oblivious to the ongoing riots, was shot and killed by a white civilian as he rode his bicycle. He was 13 years old. Mayor Albert Boutwell, tears streaming down his cheeks, announced that the city had asked for help from the state. Quote, "It is a tragic event," Boutwell said. "It is just sickening that a few individuals could commit such a horrible atrocity. The occurrence of such a thing has so gravely concerned the public." In response, Governor Wallace sent out 500 National Guardsmen, 300 state troopers, and various deputies from different counties across the state to attempt to restore peace. 3 days later, the lives of the 4 girls were honored in a service attended by 8,000 people. The crowd even consisted of 40 prominent black and white figures. Among these people was Dr. Martin Luther King, who delivered a moving eulogy to commemorate the children.
These children, unoffending, innocent, and beautiful, were the victims of one of the most vicious and tragic crimes ever perpetrated against humanity.
Instead of curbing the civil rights movement, the bombing amplified it. Media outlets across the country published the disgust and outrage members of the public vocalized. Reverend C.E. Thomas, the presiding preacher at the time, stated at Carol Robertson's funeral that, quote, "Somehow the whole world was shaken. People of all races died along with them. More than 170 million people were weeping with us, even countless thousands throughout the world, regardless of color." With the eyes of the world watching, President Kennedy released a press statement that detailed, quote, "If these cruel and tragic events can only awaken that city and state, if they can only awaken this entire nation to a realization of the folly of racial injustice and hatred and racial violence, then it is not too late for all concerned to unite in steps toward peaceful progress before more lives are lost." With the public's attitude radically shifting, Kennedy was provided with the platform to construct one of the most influential bills in the history of the United States, the Civil Rights Bill of 1964.
Now the time has come for this nation to fulfill its promise. The events in Birmingham and elsewhere have so increased the cries for equality that no city or state or legislative body can prudently choose to ignore them.
This bill, passed after President Kennedy's assassination, was signed into law by the preceding President Lyndon B. Johnson. Its provisions called for a ban on segregation in all public facilities and outlawed discriminatory practices in regards to employment. Following the ratification of the Civil Rights Act, President Lyndon B. Johnson passed the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which prohibited any unfair practices from hindering African Americans' right to vote. By the end of 1965, a quarter of African Americans had been registered by federal examiners to legally vote. While there were important legislative initiatives that resulted from the bombing, the perpetrators themselves were not fully brought to justice until the early 2000s. In 1977, Robert Chambliss was tried for the murders and was convicted to serve a life sentence. Similarly, in 2001, Thomas Blanton Jr. and Bobby Frank Cherry were tried and sentenced to life in prison. Herman Frank Cash, the fourth participant, died before any further investigation took place. The deaths of 4 innocent girls paved the way for crucial civil rights legislation to ingrain itself in American society and dissipate a plethora of racial tension that marred American culture at the time. The tragedy itself allowed American citizens to fully grasp the need for civil rights.